54, the thing about 1954 to 65, it was such a violent era. And we decided that in building the course, we wanted to also address the issues and events and different organizations that led up to 1954, which was the Brown versus Board of Education, and then move to the different areas, because this particular focus is in the South. And we know that obviously there were many issues outside of the South, but it did begin there in pretty much 1954 with the Brown decision, and moving to Selma, moving to the nonviolent area. In 1955 was the Montgomery bus boycott. And these were the times that we hear so much about Dr. King. And what we wanted to make sure was that we focused on individuals that obviously made, that we heard so much about and that has such a great impact. But many times we forget about the everyday citizens, the everyday working people, Black folk that really were making a difference, particularly in the bus boycott and later in Selma and other areas. And what we found is that we thought we had an understanding of who Dr. King was, and that there was a Malcolm X, and what did the Black Panther Party have to do with it. But we find that there were many times that women were left out. We didn't hear about the Fannie Lou Hamers. We didn't hear about the Gloria Scotts. We did not hear about individuals that made such an impact, and were really, there was discrimination even within the civil rights movement. So I felt, and those that worked with me, that we really had to focus on what students did not really have a great idea about. And what we found is Antioch students had a great interest. And they really didn't have an idea of the role of students in that movement, and the role that students really had a great impact. So I would just end, and I'd like to pass it on to the other instructors, but I think this era of We Shall Overcome has a great impact as we moved on this historical process to the Black Lives Matter movement. There are many connections that we found that students can connect to, and students can really look at history in a different way. And I'll just close with a quote from James Baldwin. He said, "History is not the past, it is the present. We carry our own history. We carry the history with us. We are our history." And we hope that in this course and others that I so happy to collaborate with others on, including Catch the Fire, the history of the Black church, the Harlem Renaissance movement, and watching Black on television from Amos and Andy to Blackish. So these courses really focus on this history of Black folk that are not just in one like linear view. And we hope that more students become involved in the courses and can see the relevance and the engagement that they can take part in, and have that, help dispel that miseducation that we all have suffered for. So, and I think Messy Conversations is just a great way to further engage. So.
Yeah, well, thank you, Elaine. And I want to quickly mention that in addition to that, every quarter you oversee the Messy Conversations Independent Studies for students. And so it's a chance to quickly say that if you're an advisor or a student, that there's an opportunity to do a 1-unit independent study on Messy Conversations with Elaine.
Right.
That's a fantastic opportunity.
Yeah, and I actually see some of the students that have taken part real deeply engaged in the domestic conversation, the one unit. And we used the book, which David actually designed that independent study. And I was very happy because that gave individuals opportunity to take the courses, and the how to be an anti-racist, Kende's book is the book we use. And might I just add that in the courses that I'm involved in, we always have speakers. We want to hear the other voices in the community, from scholars to community voices to individuals from different organizations, to help really fulfill the engagement throughout the quarter. And before the pandemic, we actually went on field trips, but we're still doing virtual field trips. Just recently, we did a field trip to African American Museum in North Carolina, looking at the Harlem Renaissance. So
Thank you.
It's part of our Antioch tradition. Okay.
Thank you, Elaine. And one
you.
last thing quickly on Elaine, if you don't know this about her already, she's just a consummate weaver of community. I've learned so much from her about that over the years. Jane, how are you doing? I want to talk to you about your policing, profiling, and prisons course. I'm sure I got them in the wrong order. But can you say something about what inspired the development of that course and how you see it in our curriculum and why you're passing it off to someone else? You're on mute, by the way.
Only 5,000 Zooms later. Still don't have that. Yes, thank you so much. And thank you, Elaine, for making me cry, okay, with all that you say in your James Baldwin quote and all your work. And also want to say I'm also an alum of Undergraduate Studies. So inspired by some of the folks here. And so this course, Prisons, Policing, and Profiling, was actually on the shelf at Antioch and Undergraduate Studies. They had run it maybe 20 years ago, or 22 or 23 years ago, and it was on the shelf for a long time. And about 5 years ago, I think the chairs got it out of the archives and said, this is what we're talking about right now. And so it did need some tweaking. David, thank you for saying I developed it. Yeah, we've been doing work on it all the time, every year, because this is such a dynamic and important conversation. So of course, there's changes in the data, just that alone from 20 years ago, but also the voices, right? And so the people who are talking about this, the language that people are using, the discussions, I mean, it's a word soup, right? We can talk about policing in prisons. We can talk about surveillance, erasures, enclosures, racism, greed, oppression, the prison economy. There's an awful lot that goes into this conversation. But I think what's really important is this idea that we arrive at some way to look at it that helps us know where to be in this moment in time, where not only, and the sort of well-known fact, we have incarcerated 2 million people in our country, more than any other country in the world per capita, but there's 2 million people who also work in the prison system. And there's several million who are not behind physical cages, but they have bracelets or ankle bracelets, or they're on parole, or they're on probation. And then if you broaden that to include surveillance, we have millions and millions of people in our country who are impacted by the system. And then up close, so many of us maybe were a victim of a violent crime, or we have a family member who's a police officer or military, or somebody who is incarcerated, a family member who is incarcerated now or has been. And many of us are all of those things, right? So this system that we talk about as though it's something in isolation really is very much a part of our culture and our world. And now we're in this place where we're seeing a conversation that includes a lot of that language that we're accustomed to hearing about defining crime and good versus bad, but we're also having a conversation that includes discussion about what does it mean to abolish a system that's cruel and inhumane? What does it mean to include everybody, as like Father Greg says, in a circle of love, right? And understand that we are not the worst thing we've ever done. What does it mean to open our borders, right? And provide sanctuary for people instead of the opposite, which is what's happening right now. And so, and for a lot of folks, you know, people are talking about homelessness like crazy, right? There's so many unsheltered people in all of our cities and towns. A lot of those people are in a pipeline, either coming or going into the incarceral system as well. And so it's important to think about the criminalization of poverty, the criminalization of mental illness, the criminalization of substance abuse, and that really touches everybody. I think no family is not engaged in that discussion in some way. And so it's a fantastically exciting class. It's heartbreaking. We cry in the class. And then we also try every single session and we succeed actually, to find the good news, because there's so much beautiful, compassionate, revolutionary work being done, whether it's around the folks who have come out and getting jobs and, you know, basics, food, housing, and work, or the work that's happening in some of the more kind of enlightened spaces where folks are learning to garden or learning to install solar panels, who are incarcerated, but then have a promise of a life when they get out. So there's a lot of exciting work and people just who are working towards liberation that we talk about every single week. And I could go on for hours. I think I'm supposed to stop now, though.
Let me ask you a question, though. I really appreciate that description of the course. And I'm also thinking about it as an undergraduate student who, you know, wants to become a therapist, or an advisor who has students who want to become a therapist, and they sit there and say, well, why would I take a course on prisons and policing? Like, that doesn't, how would you respond to them?
Okay, well, I think there's certainly some real important data about there's more than data, and the data is always slightly flawed, more than 1 million individuals who are incarcerated, meaning they're either in jail or in prison, who are living with mental illness. So I would say we're all in the business of mental health, all of us. But for people who are choosing that path, first of all, you know, thank you. It's amazing, important work. But so many people who are facing challenges, health challenges of all kinds, end up impacted by the incarceral system. And I think we need tools to make that better, whether it's working like community psychology, working on the kind of whole big picture, or individual therapists who just have folks who need that kind of support, and it's so important to have that awareness that is possible, that that's a likelihood. And how do we keep each other safe, right? Whether as a therapist or a teacher or a friend.
Thank you so much, Jane. It's really wonderful to hear you talking about the course. Very, very, very much so.
Oh, can I just say one thing? That Martha Gonzalez, who I am really thrilled about, has taught many different courses related to the incarceral system, and is in particular, I want to say, an expert actually on restorative justice and transformational justice. And so, and comes with a deep academic background of history and social movements and women's movements. And she brings a creative piece to this, right? So looking at art and systems and impacted folks, and a knowledge about race and gender, which are crucially important also in the conversation. So super excited for that for fall.
And she's going to be picking that up this fall. Yeah, I was really impressed with her when I met her. Thank you, Jane. I want to bring Erin Kaplan into the conversation. Erin, very glad to have you joining us to talk about your workshop on Blackness and identity in nonfiction. And again, I want to sort of start from a student perspective. What does that mean? Blackness and identity and non-fiction. What is this workshop?
Oh, thanks, David. Well, I'll explain that in a second. I just want to say my full name is Erin Aubrey Kaplan, and Aubrey is my dad, who died just before the George Floyd uprising back in 2020. And whatever consciousness I have, I really owe much to him and to my shero, Elaine. So I just want to give credit. So the course, Blackness and Identity, I think this is, I have a bad memory now, but I think Alistair and I came up with this. As a journalist who frequently writes essays, I thought about how difficult it is to simply to be Black and write about oneself. It sounds very simple and straightforward. And every memoir writer would tell you that's not true. But for Black people, it's very fraught. And Elaine mentioned James Baldwin, one of the writers I mentioned in the workshop. And essentially what I do is toss around the idea of how does a Black person in a country that negates their individuality and degrades humanity, how do we write about ourselves? Is it through the prism of society? Is it through the prism purely of ourselves? Excuse my dogs. Shut up. I'm sorry, the mailman came. Hey, excuse me. So I take the workshop is about highlighting certain writers and kind of describing how they did it. James Baldwin was amazing in many ways, and he's enjoyed a renaissance lately. And he's known for his essays on race and politics. But James Baldwin, to me as a reader, was always put himself at the center of this question of America, right? And he always said, what are we going to do? Meaning all of us. And he centered Blackness in a kind of a radical way that hasn't really been duplicated. And so in the course, we talk about how this question of Black individuality, which is really internally contradictory in this country, goes back a long way, but also it really starts to get looked at seriously in the Harlem Renaissance, where we have this entity called the New Negro. The New Negro was not the old Negro, which was the slave, the enslaved, the person with no history, the person with no individuality. And so we've had to, hey, I'm so sorry, I apologize.
It's okay.
Darby, stop it. No, sorry. So we basically look at those literary strategies. We look at the Harlem Renaissance and how Black people had to create themselves. I'm sorry. You know what? Can you come back to me?
On our end, I think it's okay. It may be disturbing to you, but I think we're doing okay.
Okay, I'm sorry. It's rather loud to me.
And in Darby's defense, there was a postman at the door.
There was a postman at the door, but he's gone. Darby, stop it. Stop it. So in addition to Baldwin, we look at writers from the Harlem Renaissance, Zora Neale Hurston, who also forged a real path in terms of writing about herself as full and complete, and not didn't have to persuade anyone to accept her. She paid a price, I think, in other ways, but she's a model in this course. She has a famous line from her memoir, Dust Tracks on a Road, which, we don't know how true the entire memoir is, but she says, for people who don't value me, who don't love me, I feel sorry for them, because she has what's called unconditional self-worth. So we talk about that and how Black writers struggle to write themselves into being. And we get trapped a lot by stereotypes, by ideas of authenticity. we have what I call the Up from the Ghetto memoir, which is about Black people and how they overcome. And that is a real story. The overcoming is a real story, but it is a story that is not all of us. And it's a story that has come in too many ways to define us. And so the whole question is how we find a balance. And again, how we write ourselves as individuals in a country that has, for most of its history, denied that status to Black people. We show, one of the things I do is show the film Ethnic Notions, which is a film from the 80s, but it's all about the history of Black stereotypes that have come to dominate popular imagination of Black people. And I think it still does in many ways. So we start with that, and then from there we look at other, we look at music, we look mostly at writing, but we look at the whole evolution, the whole struggle of Black people creating themselves on the page. Music is one thing, but writing is something else. And we just talk about, and we show how we've overcome that and not overcome it. And how it's kind of it's a real 2 steps forward, 1 step back, or maybe 2 steps forward, 2 steps back kind of process. And yes, I mean, that's really, I think, all I need to say about that.
Well, I want to ask you, you mentioned James Baldwin and Zora Neale Hurston. You drop another name or two on us that you treat in the workshop?
We talk about Albert Murray, who Ralph Ellison, who was a fiction writer, but really drew a lot of his novel from the life, the real life in Harlem. We talk about Gwendolyn Brooks, who, because poetry is also a form of nonfiction, and she wrote really fiercely about not just the kind of hard life of Black folks in Chicago, but about humanity, about people. And it's a really hard balance to strike. And she's one of, those are 2 other people that we focus on. We also focus on, in kind of briefly, hip hop, because that is also about the self. It is commercialized. It is, sometimes falls prey to the stereotypes, etc. But it is nonfiction. So we focus on that as well.
Thank you, Erin. Really appreciate that. And to me, at least, right, it's so obvious the importance of a workshop on those topics as ways of augmenting our understanding of who we are as human beings, how we become the human beings that we want to be, the struggles, the challenges, all of that. Really, really rich. Thank you for that. I want to turn to Consuelo. Super glad to have you here, Consuelo.
Thank you for letting me be here.
Yeah. Do you want to give a general introduction to your workshop? And then I've got maybe a question or two for you.
Sure. The workshop is an all-day workshop. It's on Saturday, October 28th from 9 to 5. And basically what I do is I focus on the different components of the Day of the Dead celebration. First, the historical one, the traditional one that started in Mexico with the indigenous communities there, and how they originally celebrated the dead, if you will, and what their rituals were, how they really dedicated many of their activities to the dead for a certain period of time. And then I take the students into the more contemporary part of history in Mexico with the artists such as Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera, and really importantly, Jose Guadalupe Posada, who really became a political voice during the Days of the Dead, where he really he skewered the politicians and he spoke to the people in general, like the masses who were often illiterate. And I talk about what he did and how he did it. And during the Days of the Dead, where everyone is the same in the grave. So you don't have any kind of distinction because you're you're all going to head that way. We're all going to head that way. And so he was allowed by the government then to be able to poke fun at politicians. So I go into that, and then the artwork that was created by the artists in Mexico, and then bring it into Los Angeles and the United States, and give the contemporary history of the Day of the Dead here in Los Angeles, which started with the Vietnam War and the disenfranchised communities that were going to war, and often coming back in body bags or severely wounded. So those were the history, that's the history. And then we go into the structure of the altar, what the altar signifies, what the levels are, why it is an important part of the celebration. And we also do a lot of the craft work. I actually teach how to make paper flowers that are part of the celebration. And each one of those is an offering. When you spend time making something for an offering, it becomes itself an offering. Many of the altars that I also show are significant in both the offerings that they have, but also what the people are, who the people are that they are honoring, that people honor on an altar. It could be an individual, or it could be very, very much like what I have done in the past, which is focused on the deaths within disenfranchised communities due to police brutality, the pandemic, border crossings, mass shootings based on religion, ethnicity, and or identities, and also the economic realities that a lot of the disenfranchised communities, such as the unhoused here in Los Angeles. But yeah, that is in a nutshell what my workshop is about. And one last thing is that I also am going to be incorporating literary altars, because I think it's important for people to know that you can create an altar through your own words, much like what someone just said earlier. I think Erin said about the poem being nonfiction. It is also a literary altar.
Thank you, Consuelo. I was so excited to be able to work with you on developing that and bringing that to Antioch this past year. And one of the things that the obvious is often something I'm learning. And one of the things I learned that seems obvious in hindsight was the way that you look at the history and look at it, the celebration as a living celebration that changes in history over time, and the way that it changes with the Chicano movement and here in Los Angeles, and how it, and just really fascinating.
I do want to just, from this book that is very important. It's the only book. It's the Day of the Dead in the USA. This is a quote from the book. These rituals create semi-sacred spaces that are simultaneously sites for cultural affirmation via the enactment of ancestral customs and political expression, in which the dead support the living in the condemnation of injustice. So I think that is a really apropos to this particular session, but also apropos to the workshop itself.
Brilliant. You're getting lots of love, Consuelo.
Thank
I'd like to turn to Mary Lou Finley. Really wonderful to have you joining us, Mary Lou. And I'm just going to let you speak generally about your course on global women's health.
Okay, thank you, David. And it's really wonderful to hear from all the rest of people and what you're doing. So this course is a sort of different framing of social justice. It grew, as I said earlier, about some work I did in public health back in the 90s, and have had a modest connection with a project in India that's in a very poor area that's been going on for many, many years. But I don't have a lot of concrete experience like this. So what I find is that the class, one thing that it works for women particularly, although I sometimes have some men, to give global perspectives. It helps people move into another kind of reality than the one they're most familiar with. And I'm drawing on a lot of public health work. But the public health work is often sort of frustrating to me because public health was mostly about maternal and child health. And I didn't really want to just, as an old women's studies instructor from way back, I didn't want to just focus on women as mothers, but to look at women across the lifespan. So there are some materials on that that I've been able to find. Primarily it deals with what we come up against is looking at gender as part of the social determinants of health. There are many circumstances in which women's health is affected by the fact that they don't have very much power. And all the way from if a pregnant woman needs to go to a hospital, in many cultural situations, the decision is made by her husband. And so that often doesn't work from the woman's perspective. So there's many other dimensions. Women often get the leftover food, even if they're pregnant. So there's a whole variety of ways in which women's status in the society affects their health. And so that's part of the social justice dimension of this. And what I have really found interesting is some work that's done by the Hesperian Health Organization that a long time ago published a book called Where There Is No Doctor. And now they have a book called Where Women Have No Doctor. But one I really like for my class is called Health Actions for Women, Practical Strategies to Mobilize for Change. And it's really an interesting way. It's kind of taking a community organizing approach to women's health issues. And so like some of the kind of things I've talked about, for instance, they've realized they have to educate the men about what happens if you don't get a woman to the hospital in time when she needs to be there and she's having a baby. So beginning to turn those individual problems of individual women into collective community problems that women, when they're grouped together, can begin to solve at the community level in ways that they can't solve individually because of the historic discrimination against women. So I really like that part of it. And I think that that's been really interesting. It has some delicate aspects to it in the sense that I try to find voices of people from these communities. I try to find stories about where traditional approaches to women and their healthcare actually is very positive, so that we're not just talking about a Western medical framework imposed upon other kinds of cultures. There's a sweet story that comes from Laos about how the whole village makes sure that a pregnant woman is getting enough to eat. There's the curandero stories from Central America and Mexico that I've been able to draw on. I have a connection with people who are doing Ayurvedic medicine in India. And so I'm trying to be respectful of the traditional medical traditions as much as we can. And of course, you know, this is bits and pieces, because when we're talking about a global perspective, obviously we're just landing on a few particular places, but nonetheless, it can kind of give people that perspective. I also have a good book called The Women's Atlas, a World Women's Atlas, and that has a number of health issues in it. And so we can look at, okay, what is the incidence of maternal mortality around the world? Where are the places worst? Where is it best? Or look at the female genital mutilation issues. Where is that operating? There, by the way, that's one of the things that has changed over a number of years. Really motivated, started out 30 years ago when I started this with women doctors from Africa who have begun to do that. And the law has changed in a number of countries right now, which doesn't necessarily totally solve the problem. But nonetheless, that involves, again, engaging the men with in the community to try to shift the mores of the cultures. So the other piece of this that really is a social justice piece is that I taught for a while a globalization Development and Grassroots Movements class. And what I found from that was that the extent to which these countries have borrowed money from the World Bank or some other international monetary fund, those organizations, those international organizations, have demanded repayment of that money. And in many of these countries, what that means is that they have to cut their budget for education and health because they don't have a big military budget. They don't have much else. And so there is a really colonizing aspect, the neocolonialism aspect to the fact that these countries, many of these countries do not have the funding for medical resources that they like. So I'm really hoping that students can begin to see these situations that women find themselves in this larger global context as well. So I think that's probably all I need to say. I'm excited about it, and I feel like it does open up a lot of, it helps a lot of the students think in a larger frame than they have been accustomed to thinking. So I find that to be helpful and interesting. I'm always looking for materials. I'm thinking maybe I should try novels. I'm not a novel reader, but to get the voices of people from African countries and some other places in particular that would give the how it looks from that perspective. I've found some things. I've had one great biography of a woman that I used right from Africa that I use it oftentimes at the beginning of the class, just to get the students immersed in the reality as another person experiences it in a very, very different kind of culture. And somebody who lives kind of half in, with one foot in modern culture and another foot in a very traditional way of looking at things. So I think that's all I have to say. But anyway, thanks for inviting me to join you.
Thank you, Mary Lou. And if I understand you correctly, if anybody has some good resources that they want to turn you on to, they can send them your way.
I would love that. I would love that. Yeah.
My guess is that's probably true of all of us. So thank you for that. And thank you for speaking to the importance of a global lens and a global perspective. And that's an important part of the work that we do with our students and trying to offer a different frame for understanding issues and experience. Very valuable. Asa, I'm going to ask you, because I have been negligent and haven't looked to see if there are questions or comments in the chat. Not to put you on the spot.
No, yeah, there's been quite a few comments and mostly people giving shout outs and kudos and enjoying. There haven't been any questions unless I missed one. I think we also forgot to prompt the audience to ask your questions in the chat, or maybe I missed that as well. But if someone does have a question, you're welcome to join in or add it to the chat, and we'll keep a closer eye on it.
My memory as it is, I think I did prompt people, but may have forgotten. So I have a couple of observations while we wait to see if anybody else wants in on this conversation in the last minutes that we have. One is I want to thank the group, the panel. I don't know, maybe I've had this experience and I've forgotten, but I don't know that I've had the experience of a number of faculty talking about their courses in this way, and especially around connections with race and social justice. And that it provides not only the opportunity to kind of like, oh, wow, right, we're doing this kind of work here at Antioch, that's impressive, but also to meet the faculty who are teaching the course and hear their passion and hear their intelligence and their creativity and the things that they're thinking about what they're getting right in their course and what they want to keep working on. And it just seems like such an Antiochian endeavor. So I'm really pleased that you all have come out. Have anyone else want in on this conversation? Questions for any of our panelists or broader issues about the role of race in the curriculum at Antioch that you would like to raise? Including any of the panelists of one another, by the way.
Is Martha Gonzalez the musician Martha Gonzalez?
No, no, that's a different Martha Gonzalez, I'm pretty sure. Who's that Martha Gonzalez, I think, is married to
Quetzal.
sí. So no, I believe that's a different person. I didn't ask her who she was married to, but I don't think that's her.
Not that that takes anything away from her.
She is an artist in many ways, but I don't think musical.
David, this is Elaine. I'm having trouble with starting the video back up, but what will you be teaching in the fall? And maybe you could share a little bit about that with us.
I might hear in a second. Thank you, Elaine. I also saw Asa's hand up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks, David. Yeah, I'm also curious about that, but I did have a kind of bigger picture question for any of the faculty who have joined us today, of thinking about, I was kind of thinking with Mary Lou and your more global approach and looking at on an international level, and thinking about the kind of flip side of that and the hyper local and the way that social justice is linked to local communities and movement, and how maybe that is shifting within Antioch now that we have more remote classes, or that we have students from all over taking our classes. How do you see that playing into this kind of education of connecting with local movements? I know both Jane and Erin, your work is really connected with the communities here in LA. So it's really to anyone, if you feel.
Anyone on the panel want to pick up Asa's question?
Well, I can say for the celebration that I focus on, it's all, I mean, there are so many aspects of the international community that have atrocities, like, for example, what's going on in Ukraine right now, where people are being bombed and killed in residential areas that would be otherwise war crimes. So that can be integrated very easily. What is local becomes global, and what is global becomes local. We have a very big Ukrainian community here that still, there's an ebb and flow to each of our communities, whether it's Ukrainian or Mexican or African, or, you know, it does, though there are people in our local community that have relationships. And so what impacts those communities in other countries impacts us. And you will see, I will not be surprised if we see a Chinese altar dedicated to the people who died in Monterey Park. And so there, but those were all immigrants from China. So I can just speak to that in the coursework and the artwork, the installation work, the Day of the Dead work that I do. I see that.
Yeah, Jane?
Yeah, it's great to talk about the international piece because it is completely intimately connected. And I think it helps us to understand certain things, like in the urban studies courses and in other courses, we talk about people who are living with housing instability. And as we know, eviction is a big part of what causes folks to become homeless, very clearly. Booted out of your house, you don't have a home. And that's connected to all this other work that people are doing, right? Because because of geographic racism, because of environmental injustice, which is environmental racism. And there are, for example, global anti-eviction networks. So the folks who are doing anti-eviction work in Johannesburg are hanging out online and working with the people who are doing anti-eviction work in Chicago, Illinois, and in Louisiana, and in the favelas. And so I think all the classes have a through line that is about the work that we do. And when we see injustice, whether we do research or we make art or we listen to music or we try to deconstruct history, there is this through line that crosses all of our borders. When we talk about the environment, right? There's no boundaries or borders when you're talking about water and air. Anyway, so that's just a beautiful piece that I see, and I think maybe it can move people to work. You can work locally, you can work globally, and it all comes together somehow.
Thank you for that. I'm recognizing that we're coming up on 5 o'clock, so I have a closing statement, and then if you can hang out for another 10-15 minutes, please do, and we'll continue our conversation more informally. And to wrap up, I was thinking about my own approach to teaching and to education, and it forced to call it something. I think I call it kind of a relational pedagogy, and that, you know, whatever it is that we're doing in the classrooms, it all turns on the relationships that are present there between students and teachers, and so on. And if it's relational, then it's narrative. If it's narrative, it's story. And that so much of what we're evoking in our classrooms are spaces where stories are constructed, which is a huge step in the educational process, to be able to construct your own stories. Spaces where stories are deconstructed, where stories that we've inherited or picked up along the way get taken apart, and spaces where stories are reconstructed and oriented towards the past and the future here in the present. And race then seems central to me in that. In anything that has to do with our self-understanding seems central to that work that we're doing. And I feel that in the work of all the faculty who so generously shared their time with us today. With that, I'm going to remind you that next week we have another messy conversation on updates on violence against the AAPI communities with Norbert and Anna. We encourage you to come back for that. If you need to go, I saw that Andrea did get a question in the chat. We'll try to attend to that as soon as we formally close. If you can hang out, please do. And otherwise, we'll see you next week. Thank you for being here, and thank you again to our panel. Much appreciated.
Wonderful people, wonderful, wonderful people.
And for those of you that can stay, Andrea raised a question. I don't know, Andrea, do you want to ask your question? Sure. Get another voice in the room.
Sure. It's just, it feels like there's a history piece, there's a future piece, there's an action piece. And when you have to make choices about where you're going to put your focus, what are the things you're prioritizing, given, the Antioch undergrad population, what do you think are the most important things to emphasize?
Nice.
Andrea, I dropped a note in the chat for you.
Yes, I saw. Thanks, Jane.
Would you like to say that out loud for us, Jane?
Sure to break the ice.
Thank you.
I'm just going to say what I wrote. Many of us, I think, choose resources that students can connect to. Andrea's question was, how do we decide when there's such a proliferation of stuff to choose from, and that whether it's our stories or our neighborhoods or our lived experiences, which is that those words, our lived experiences become very important in our classrooms, right? And so that's where people remember that conversation we had, remember the day that so-and-so talked about that thing that happened to him. I think people really do connect to that, and we can cite academic journals, forever and a day, but those ways that we say, when you go down the street in a certain neighborhood in Wilmington, in the southeast cities of Los Angeles, and lots of people have asthma and emphysema. What is that? How do you feel about that? Is that familiar to you? And people are like, oh yeah, that's what happens in my neighborhood in Boyle Heights also, right? So there's just those kinds of things, I think, that are super valuable and make our talking about something become the students' conversation, and they're talking about it, and then we're learning from each other.
Others on the panel have a response to that question or to what Jane just said?
Well, I like the idea of finding things that students can relate to. And I think when you're talking about a global perspective, that's more challenging because it doesn't, I don't expect that the students, some have had some global experience, but I don't assume they're going to go work in a global setting in some kind of way, although some might. But so I think finding things written or by people from those communities can be really helpful, particularly the stories sorts of things. Academic papers doesn't really cut it in terms of that kind of connection, although, sometimes I like them to experience that so they know how to at least connect with it. So, I think I struggle to find ways to present things that can actually engage people when we're talking about, I think my class focuses on the global South, so it's taking people into worlds that they don't, that are unfamiliar. But the more I can find stories from those communities, that really helps.
I'm going to send you a link I'm using in my class, the Health Equity Resource Guide.
Okay. Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Sure.
And Erin, I saw your hand.
Yeah, oh, I know we all teach different things, in different ways, and I'm doing literature. But I find that I probably don't have enough boundaries in my class. But I use myself all the time in talking about the struggle of Black people to write, because I'm in that struggle. So it's kind of a no-brainer to me, but also I find the back and forth, the give and take, is really what makes happen. And we all probably take some really kind of abstract concepts, even the concept, like you said, David, Blackness and identity. What is that? Well, that's a good question. And I find that if you talk about how you live it, and as opposed to what it, some kind of textbook definition, it's really powerful. And I just love the ideas I get from students about things I never thought of, how they define something. And I actually say, oh my God, I had not thought of that. And that's just really energizing. And I get a lot of this from non-Black students who resonate with this idea of Blackness and identity. And I try to make that really I don't really like the word inclusive, but relevant. People find their relevance though. They do. They find their relevance.
I know in my own work, I think I draw or try to use two different frameworks. So one is a historical framework to situate whatever it is we're talking about in its history, which changes students' perspectives because they typically don't know that history or don't know much about that history. And then the other resonates with a lot of what I'm hearing other people on the panel saying, which is, introducing them to people, introducing them to stories. I think of it as, I'm going to introduce you to a bunch of friends you haven't met yet. And so yeah, you need to, I don't know, when Erin was talking about her workshop, I kept waiting to, do you do Eldridge Cleaver, Soul on Ice? Like there's a friend everybody needs to meet, right, at some point, and on, right? We could just fill our time doing that in the historical framework of whatever it is that we're talking about.
Mhm.
Well, I don't do Eldridge Cleaver, but you're giving me an idea. Yeah.
I remember as a kid, that book had a big impact on me. It's like I hadn't run into that voice before. And it was like, wow, really shook me and broadened my world.
I think the most confrontational autobiography I ever read was Dick Gregory's.
Yeah.
It's famously titled N-word. I'll just say that because we're in polite company. You can't get too messy, but that was the challenge of his autobiography.
Yeah, and I think introducing students to various authors, literature, and so there's so many documentaries now.
Good ones.
And when we're looking at movements like the Civil Rights Movement and then the Black Power Movement and Harlem Renaissance, these names come up. And sometimes students are just not familiar at all, or they've heard just a little bit. So I think that's another form of engagement. And as we form these class communities, and then we can kind of move together. Because I think that, and I always start classes, the first class is, why are you taking the course? Or what is it that you know about the Harlem Renaissance that made you say, oh, I'm going to choose this course? So I think that engagement, we find ways in the assignments, in the with the speakers that come in to hear these other voices, and it really helps that balance. Like for instance, mentioning Eldridge Cleaver, almost every time that I do the Black Power course, his name comes up because they consider him the radical. Now, even when we're talking about the Panther Party, they will mention the Huey Newton, and by the way, they rarely mention the women. Same in the Civil Rights Movement also. So there are ways to further engage by just opening, as Du Bois talks about, opening the veil. And of course, plenty of James Baldwin and Zora, Erin always helps. So, yeah. And as I said, we're all just been miseducated. So we can just get on this journey together.
Erin, is this your book?
Where? Well,
We're not seeing it, Clarence.
Are you not seeing it?
Which one?
In my face?
Hold it up again.
I got it on my face.
You do? I don't see it.
Okay.
We can't see it, Clarence.
Is that the Dick Gregory?
Okay. You see it now?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Thank you. Really worth the read.
It just happened to be in my reach behind me.
Yeah, it's definitely worth the read.
But Dr. Tripp, we never got your answer for what you're going to be teaching this fall. That question was raised and you skirted by it.
Yeah, for obvious reasons. The course I think that's most germane to our conversation is a course on the politics of psychology, and trying to help our students understand that well, there's a history to this discipline. There's a politics to this discipline. The psychology as a discipline got in bed with certain people and not other people, and that influenced the shape and development of the discipline. And it could have developed in very different ways. And so we start there, and then we look at specific communities like LGBT and queer folk, and psychology's history and relationship with that community. We look at women and psychology's history and relationship with women. And we look at issues of race and psychology's history and relationship around race. And, you know, most of that is unknown to our students. And they tend to come in saying, well, you know, I want to become a therapist. Why? Because I really like people and I'm a good listener and people like telling me their problems, and I was helped a whole lot by therapy. It's like, well, those are all wonderful things, but, you know, is that going to sustain you? Is that going to add up to a career? Are you going to have the kind of influence and impact that you would hope? If you don't know these histories and if you don't have these other lenses. And so, you know, looking at, especially around issues of race, we spend a lot of time in the 60s when there was a great deal of racial violence, race riots erupting all over the country, and the government institutional response to those, which was largely to form commissions filled with social scientists like psychologists and psychiatrists and so on. So whether it was the Moynihan or the Kerner, lots of commissions. And the only point I'll make about that is that, you know, it's so eye-opening for students when they are reading the work of these commissions and seeing that time after time after time, they realized, well, the only way to address the racial violence in the country is a radical economic reorganization. That these are at their heart economic issues, but we can't do that, so we need a plan B. And plan B was blame Black women, blame Black mothers. And they did it over and over and over again. And so that's, and the influence of that on the development and practice of the field of psychology. So that's what I'm up to in the fall. Anybody else want to expand our conversation?
Well, one thing that I do a great deal of engaging in, bringing in musicians and the music and cultural perspective of Black folk, and that also lifts the veil, and how Black folk have been involved using art and their artistic actions as powerful engagement in resistance. And that seems to engage the class community where there is all students. And many really don't seem to realize that all of the movements of Black folk has impacted other movements, from the queer movement to the women's movement, every stage of engagement. And when people see that they can connect from that standpoint, I think it makes a difference.
Well, Elaine, you've touched on something twice now, and I think it's related to Andrea's earlier question. As we think about resources for our courses and organizing our courses, that it needn't, that it's important that it needn't only be written text, right? And you mentioned documentaries, film, now music, and that there's a lot of different resources that we can bring in. And we live in an age where this is easier to do than it's ever been in terms of access to these things. And it presents our students a better and more well-rounded encounter with the issues in our classes. So I appreciate you continuing to raise that.
Yes, I think that's been very successful. And this connection with all of the instructors today, I think that each one of us can connect to, if we broaden the scope of our engagement. And especially as we tap into popular culture to explore, different theories of race, this critical race theory and gender, and what the courts are doing. People can these students can visually see, they understand a lot better, and they can see themselves perhaps engaging in some of the actions to, stand up for social justice and use even actions as students. Yeah. And I learned a lot of that from Erin. She gets in the classroom, and when she's writing and engaging with people through her journalistic travels, it makes a big difference. It's such a broad curve. So, yeah.
Elaine.
Well, I'm going to wrap us up. And with this observation, these past few years have been challenging times at Antioch, and especially in the undergraduate studies programs as we find our way through this pandemic and try to keep our programs lively and engaged and doing good work. And so to me, this is heartening to hear faculty talk about their courses in these ways, and to recognize that the heart of Antioch is still beating, the heart of the undergraduate studies program still beating in really positive ways and good work, and encourage students, faculty, everyone to support these classes and the work that we're trying to do to continue to hold on to a strong curriculum, even in a time where we're having to cut classes. So thank you each and every one for being here, and especially to our panelists, Erin and Consuelo and Mary Lou, and who am I forgetting? Oh, Jane, and of course, my dear friend and fellow Gemini, Elaine Parker-Gills. We'll see you next week.
Studies.